May 15th, 1990, in the small town of Mulberry, Florida, a fire lit up the night sky. When firefighters entered the charred remains of the Knowles family home, they found a scene far worse than a house fire. Clarence and Barbara Knowles, along with their daughter Bonnie, had all been stabbed to death before the blaze was set. 35 years later, the man responsible, Joseph Pittman, now 63, is facing execution by lethal injection. The murders were brutal, planned, and unforgettable. This is the story of what happened, why it happened, and how justice has slowly moved toward its final chapter. But right before we dive in the case, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories. Long before the night of the murders, Joseph Pittman's life was marked by struggle. He grew up in poverty, often beaten by his mother with a belt from the time he was just 4 years old. He failed repeatedly in school, was teased by classmates, and carried a reputation for being restless and hard to control. Those early scars didn't excuse what he would later do, but they painted the picture of a man who never learned to manage his anger. Years later, Pittman married Bonnie Knowles and became part of her family. But by 1990, the marriage had collapsed into a bitter divorce. The fights were constant, and the anger only deepened when Marie's younger sister, Bonnie, accused him of sexual assault. The charge was dropped, but the damage to Pittman's pride was permanent. He believed Bonnie had humiliated him, and he never forgave her. By then, Pittman's mindset was poisoned by rage and the need for control. Instead of letting go, he came to see the Knowles family not as in-laws, but as enemies standing in his way. And in his twisted logic, the only way forward was to wipe them out completely. In the quiet hours of May 15th, 1990, David Pittman put his anger into action. The bitterness from his failing marriage and the grudge he carried against Bonnie had festered into something deadly. Before he even entered the Knowles home, he made sure to cut the telephone line outside. That one detail showed his state of mind: cold, calculating, determined to trap the family with no way to call for help. Inside, Pittman went first to Bonnie. She had humiliated him with her accusation the year before, and in his twisted logic, she became the prime target of his rage. When she resisted him and cried out, he stabbed her over and over, finally slashing her throat to silence her completely. Barbara, her mother, was next. She stepped into the hallway, likely trying to protect her daughter, and Pittman turned on her with the same brutal fury. Clarence, the father, tried to reach the phone in the living room, fighting for any chance of survival. Pittman struck him down too. In a matter of minutes, 3 people lay dying, not by chance, but by design. Then came the cover-up. Pittman poured gasoline and set the home ablaze, as if fire could erase what he had done. He fled in Bonnie's brown Toyota, only to abandon it in a ditch a short distance away. Witnesses later saw him return with his homemade tow truck, and soon smoke rose again as he set the car on fire. To him, it was about control, burning away not only lives, but the evidence of his crimes. But the flames betrayed him. Around 3 a.m., a newspaper deliveryman spotted the blaze and called authorities. When firefighters extinguished the fire and investigators entered the ruins, they uncovered the truth. The bodies of Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie bore the marks of multiple stab wounds. The autopsy confirmed what the crime itself had already shown. This was not a tragic fire. It was a brutal massacre carried out with rage, vengeance, and cold calculation. The morning after the murders, Pittman already sensed the weight of suspicion closing in. Witnesses had seen him near Bonnie's abandoned car, and word spread quickly. At the urging of his own mother, Pittman turned himself into police. It wasn't an act of remorse. It was fear, and the realization that he could not escape the net tightening around him. When investigators pieced the evidence together, the picture was overwhelming. The cut phone lines, the gasoline, the burned car, all pointed directly to Pittman. Then came the damning testimony of a jailhouse informant, who said Pittman openly described how he killed each member of the family. It wasn't just the evidence. It was his own words that sealed his fate. In April 1991, a Polk County jury found him guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with arson and grand theft. During the sentencing phase, his defense tried to present mitigating evidence: his abusive childhood, his poor schooling, his unstable behavior. But the jury was unmoved. They saw a man who planned every step of the killings, a man who chose violence again and again. By a vote of 9-3, they recommended the death penalty. The trial judge agreed. Pittman was sentenced to death on all 3 counts. The judge found 2 powerful aggravating factors: his history of violent crime and the especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel nature of the murders. For the families in that courtroom, justice had been spoken, but the legal battle was far from over. For the next 3 decades, Pittman and his attorneys would file appeal after appeal, clinging to claims of intellectual disability and due process. Time and again, the courts rejected those arguments, ruling them untimely or without merit. Each denial brought him closer to the execution chamber, where the final reckoning still awaited. After 35 years of appeals and delays, the case reached its conclusion. On September 17, 2025, at 6 p.m., David Joseph Pittman was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He became the 12th person put to death in Florida that year, a record pace under Governor Ron DeSantis. That morning, Pittman woke at 5:45 a.m. and ate a heavy final meal of steak, chicken, and biscuits. Hours later, he was led into the execution chamber, where witnesses, including Sheriff Grady Judd and surviving members of the Knowles family, waited in silence. Facing them, Pittman gave his last words: "I know you all came to watch an innocent man be murdered by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anybody. That's it." Moments later, the lethal drugs were administered. Pittman drew several deep breaths before falling still. He was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. Outside the prison, the mood was heavy. Sheriff Judd spoke to the press. His anger focused not only on Pittman's crimes, but also on the decades it had taken to reach this point. Law enforcement officials echoed his frustration, calling it unacceptable that justice had taken 35 years to fulfill. For Sheriff Judd, who had responded to the crime scene in 1990 and never forgotten the brutality of that night, the execution carried a clear message. Holding Pittman's old mug shot beside a family photo of the victims, he told reporters that Pittman had been evil in the flesh, a man who was evil then and never changed. With the chamber silent and the sentence finally carried out, the case that had haunted Polk County for decades came to an end. Justice, long delayed, had at last been delivered. The execution closed the legal chapter of one of Florida's most haunting murder cases. For the community of Mulberry, it was a reminder of lives lost, wounds that never fully healed, and a justice system that, though slow, had finally carried its sentence to the end. The story of David Joseph Pittman was one of anger, violence, and years of legal battles. His actions in 1990 shattered an entire family and scarred a community. For decades, his appeal stretched on, but in the end, the law held firm. Justice in this case had not come quickly, and it had not come without pain. But when it finally did, it carried a message that hatred and violence could not erase responsibility, and that even after 35 years, accountability still mattered. The execution closed the legal chapter, but the emotional cost of his crimes would never be erased. The case of David Joseph Pittman had ended, but the story it left behind remained unforgettable. It was a chilling reminder of how anger and revenge could destroy lives, and how justice, even delayed, was finally delivered. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more true crime stories told in full. And before you go, let me know in the comments where you watched from.